The morning sun blazed mercilessly over Interstate 10 as Jack Sullivan gripped the steering wheel of his 18-wheeler. The familiar hum of the diesel engine and the rhythmic vibration of the truck had become his meditation over the past 15 years on the road. Today's cargo was simple enough, frozen fruits destined for El Paso, but something felt different about this particular journey through the Texas desert. Jack had always been a man of routine: coffee at 5 a.m., truck inspection by 5:30, and on the road by 6. His life was measured in miles and delivery schedules, a carefully constructed existence that kept the ghosts of his past at bay. The open road was his sanctuary, where the weight of old memories couldn't follow him at 70 miles per hour. But as he crested a small hill, something made him ease off the accelerator. There, standing on the shoulder of the desolate highway, was a woman holding 2 small children. She wasn't frantically waving or holding a sign. She simply stood there with a quiet desperation that cut through the desert heat like a blade. Jack had passed countless hitchhikers over the years, always with the same policy: keep driving. Company regulations were clear, and personal safety was paramount. Yet something about this woman's posture, the way she held those babies close to her chest, the exhaustion written in every line of her body, made him apply the brakes. The massive truck shuddered to a stop about 50 yards past her. Through his side mirror, Jack watched as she seemed to hesitate, almost disbelieving that someone had actually stopped. She walked slowly toward the cab, each step deliberate and careful, as if any sudden movement might cause her salvation to disappear like a mirage. When she reached the passenger door, Jack leaned over to open it. Up close, he could see the toll the desert had taken on her. Her lips were cracked from dehydration, her clothes dusty and wrinkled, and her eyes held a wariness that spoke of recent trauma. The 2 babies she carried couldn't have been more than 18 months old, twins by the look of them. "Where are you headed?" Jack asked gently, his voice softer than usual. "Away from here," she replied, her accent carrying traces of somewhere far from Texas. "Just away from here." Jack reached into his cooler and pulled out a bottle of water, offering it to her. She accepted it gratefully, immediately wetting the lips of both children before taking a small sip herself. The gesture spoke volumes about her priorities. Even in her desperate state, the children came first. "I'm Jack," he said, putting the truck in gear. "Jack Sullivan." "Emily," she whispered, settling the babies more securely in her arms. "On Emily Rodriguez." As they pulled back onto the highway, Jack noticed Emily constantly checking the mirrors, her body tense with an alertness that suggested she was running from something or someone. The babies remained remarkably quiet, as if they had learned that silence was safer. The first hour passed in relative quiet, with only brief exchanges about basic needs. Jack offered crackers from his emergency stash, which Emily accepted and carefully broke into tiny pieces for the children. He noticed she ate very little herself, saving most of the food for them. "How long have you been walking?" Jack asked as they passed a mile marker. 3 days, Emily replied, her voice barely audible over the engine noise. "Maybe 4. Time gets confused out here." Jack felt a knot form in his stomach. 3 days in the desert with 2 babies was a miracle of survival. He'd seen what the Texas heat could do to experienced hikers, let alone a woman carrying 2 small children. "Listen," he said carefully, "I need to ask, are you in some kind of trouble? Because if you are, maybe we should—" "No police," Emily interrupted, her voice sharp with panic. "Please, no police. I just need to get somewhere safe." The way she said it made Jack's hands tighten on the steering wheel. This wasn't about outstanding warrants or simple legal troubles. This was about fear, raw, primal fear that seemed to emanate from her very core. As they continued east, Jack found himself stealing glances at his unexpected passengers. Emily kept one hand protectively over a small backpack she carried, treating it as if it contained something precious. When one of the babies began to fuss, she pulled out a worn teddy bear and handed it to the child. Jack noticed the bear seemed unusually heavy for a simple toy. "Your children are very well behaved," Jack observed. Emily's expression softened slightly. "They're not mine," she admitted. "I mean, they are now. But—" She trailed off, looking out at the endless expanse of desert. "It's complicated." The admission hung in the air between them like heat waves rising from the asphalt. Jack had learned over his years on the road that sometimes the most important stories were told in the spaces between words, in the things people couldn't quite bring themselves to say. A sign ahead indicated a rest stop in 10 miles. Jack glanced at his fuel gauge and decided they could use a break. Emily seemed relieved at the prospect of getting out of the confined space, but as they approached the exit ramp, her tension returned. "Are there always so many cameras at these places?" she asked, noticing the security equipment mounted around the facility. "Pretty standard nowadays," Jack replied, though he began to notice things through her eyes, the way the surveillance system seemed comprehensive, how the parking lot offered little in the way of concealment. As they pulled into a parking space, Jack made a decision that would change both their lives. Instead of the main rest area, he guided Emily and the children to a small picnic area on the far side of the property, partially hidden by a grove of scrub oak trees. "We'll rest here for a bit," he said. "More private." Emily's grateful look told him he'd made the right choice. As she settled the babies on a blanket from his truck, Jack began to understand that he had become part of something much larger than a simple hitchhiker pickup. The question was, what exactly had he gotten himself into? Chapter 2. Shadows on the Highway. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. As Emily settled the babies on the blanket under the shade of the scrub oak trees, Jack found himself studying her more carefully. There was something about the way she moved, deliberate, calculated, as if every gesture had been practiced for maximum efficiency. This wasn't the randomness of desperation. This was the precision of someone trained to survive. "They're beautiful children," Jack said, kneeling down to offer one of the babies a sip of water from a small cup. Emily's face softened as she watched the interaction. "Lucas and Sophia," she said quietly. "They're twins, obviously, 18 months old." She paused, her fingers gently stroking Sophia's dark hair. "Their parents. They can't care for them anymore." The way she said it made Jack's chest tighten. There was grief in those words, but also something else. A fierce protectiveness that spoke of a bond deeper than biology. "And you've taken responsibility for them," Jack observed. "Someone had to," Emily replied, her voice carrying a strength that hadn't been there an hour ago. They needed someone who would fight for them, who would make sure they had a chance at a real life. As they prepared to continue their journey, Jack noticed Emily carefully checking the contents of her backpack. She pulled out what appeared to be documents sealed in plastic bags, counted them quickly, then tucked them back inside along with the teddy bear. Her movements were practiced, methodical. "Emily," Jack said carefully, "I need to know, are we safe? I mean, is there anyone who might be looking for you?" She looked up at him, and for a moment he saw past the exhaustion to something that might have been hope. "There are people who want what I have," she admitted. "But they're not bad people, Jack. They're just desperate, and desperate people sometimes make poor choices." Back on the highway, the afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows across the desert landscape. Jack had adjusted his route slightly, taking a less traveled road that would eventually connect back to the main interstate. It was a detour that would add maybe an hour to their journey. But something told him that staying off the beaten path was the smart move. That's when he noticed the motorcycle in his rearview mirror. At first, it was just a speck on the horizon, barely visible through the heat shimmer. But as the miles passed, it maintained a consistent distance behind them, never gaining, never falling back. Jack had been driving long enough to know that this kind of precision wasn't accidental. "Emily," he said quietly, "don't look back, but I think we might have company." Her body went rigid, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she shifted slightly so she could see the side mirror without being obvious about it. "How long?" "About 20 minutes. Could be nothing, but..." "It's not nothing," she interrupted, her voice tight with controlled fear. "They found us." The motorcycle was joined by a second one, and then a third. They spread out across the road behind the truck, maintaining their distance but clearly coordinating their movements. Jack felt his heart rate increase as he considered their options. "Who are they, Emily?" She was quiet for a long moment, her attention focused on keeping the babies calm despite the tension filling the cab. "People who think I have something that belongs to them," she finally said. "Something I was supposed to deliver to someone else." "And do you have it, I mean?" Emily's hand moved protectively to her backpack. "I have something that could change everything for Lucas and Sophia. Something that could give them the life they deserve, away from all of this." Jack understood. Whatever Emily was carrying, it wasn't just valuable. It was valuable enough that people were willing to chase them across the Texas desert to get it back. But looking at those two innocent babies, seeing the fierce love in Emily's eyes, he found himself making a choice that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. "There's an old service road about 5 miles ahead," he said. "It connects to a network of farm roads that most people don't know about. We can lose them there." "Jack, you don't understand what you're getting into." "Maybe not," he interrupted, "but I understand what I'm looking at right now. 2 babies who need protecting, and a woman who's willing to risk everything for them. That's enough for me." As they approached the service road turnoff, Jack made his move. He slowed the truck as if he were pulling over, then at the last second, yanked the wheel hard right onto the narrow gravel road. The sudden turn threw everyone sideways. But Jack managed to keep the big rig upright as they bounced onto the rough surface. Behind them, the motorcycles had been caught off guard by the sudden maneuver. They overshot the turn and had to double back, giving Jack and his passengers a crucial head start. The service road was barely wide enough for the truck, with deep ditches on either side and overhanging branches that scraped against the trailer. But Jack knew these back roads from his early days as a driver, when he'd sometimes used them to avoid way stations or traffic delays. "There's an old grain elevator about 2 miles ahead," Jack explained as they bounced over a particularly rough section. "It's been abandoned for years, but the loading dock is big enough to hide the truck." Emily was holding the babies close, trying to minimize the impact of the rough ride. "What if they find us there?" "Then we'll deal with it," Jack said, surprised by the confidence in his own voice. "But right now, it's our best option." As they approached the grain elevator, a massive concrete structure that rose from the prairie like a monument to forgotten agricultural dreams, Jack felt a strange sense of purpose settling over him. For the first time in years, he was doing something that mattered beyond simply making a delivery on time. The loading dock was exactly as he remembered it, a concrete platform large enough to accommodate grain trucks, with overhead cover that would hide them from aerial surveillance. Jack maneuvered the truck into position and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, they could hear the distant sound of motorcycle engines growing closer. Emily's breathing was shallow, controlled, as she prepared for whatever came next. The babies, perhaps sensing the tension, remained remarkably quiet. "Whatever happens," Emily whispered, "promise me you'll make sure Lucas and Sophia are safe. They're innocent in all of this." Jack reached over and squeezed her shoulder. "We're all getting out of this together," he said firmly. "That's a promise." As the sound of the motorcycles grew louder, Jack realized that his simple life as a long-haul trucker had just become something far more complicated and far more meaningful. Chapter 3: Revelations in the Shadows. The abandoned grain elevator provided an eerie sanctuary as the sound of motorcycle engines circled the perimeter like mechanical vultures. Jack kept the truck's engine off, relying on the concrete structure's shadows to conceal them from view. Inside the cab, Emily held the twins close, her breathing steady but her eyes alert to every sound. "They're not going away," Jack whispered, watching through the side mirror as three figures on motorcycles slowly patrolled the area around the grain elevator. Emily shifted Lucas to her other arm, the baby's small hand clutching her shirt. "They can't afford to," she replied quietly. "What I have, it's not just valuable to them, it's their future." For the first time since picking her up, Jack saw Emily's composure crack slightly. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she looked at the babies in her arms. "Dude, I never wanted any of this. I was just supposed to be their nanny, nothing more." "Their nanny?" Jack turned to face her fully, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to form in his mind. Emily nodded, her voice taking on a distant quality as if she were reliving memories. "I worked for the Castellanos family for 3 years. Marcus and Isabella were good people. They treated me like family, not just an employee. When the twins were born, I practically raised them alongside their parents." She paused, gently rocking Sophia, who had begun to stir. Marcus owned a small construction company that specialized in government contracts. Nothing glamorous, mostly road work and building maintenance. But 6 months ago, he stumbled onto something while working on a federal building renovation. Jack felt his stomach tighten. What kind of something? Documents that shouldn't have been there, financial records, correspondence, evidence of contracts being awarded to companies that existed only on paper. Marcus thought he was doing the right thing by reporting it. The sound of footsteps on gravel made them both freeze. Through the windshield, they could see one of the motorcyclists walking slowly around the grain elevator, his helmet reflecting the late afternoon sun. He was methodical, checking every possible hiding spot. After Marcus reported what he found, Emily continued in an even quieter whisper, things started happening. First, his company lost 3 major contracts in 1 week. Then they failed a safety inspection they'd passed dozens of times before. Someone was applying pressure. Jack watched as the motorcyclist moved closer to their hiding spot. The man's body language suggested military or law enforcement training. He moved with purpose and awareness of his surroundings. Marcus and Isabella became scared, Emily went on. They started talking about leaving town, maybe even leaving the country, but before they could make any concrete plans. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "What happened to them?" Jack asked, though he was beginning to fear the answer. "Car accident," Emily said simply, but the pain in her voice suggested it was anything but simple. Late at night, coming home from a meeting with a lawyer, the police said Marcus fell asleep at the wheel, but he was the most careful driver I knew, never even got a speeding ticket. Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert evening. And the twins were with me that night. Isabella had asked me to babysit while they went to their appointment. Emily's voice grew stronger, more determined. "Before they left, Marcus gave me this backpack. He said if anything happened to them, I should take the children and the documents to a journalist friend of his in Denver, someone who could make sure the truth came out." The motorcyclist was now within 20 feet of their hiding spot. Jack could see him clearly, a tall man with broad shoulders, wearing professional riding gear that suggested this wasn't some random biker gang. These were people with resources and organization. "So the documents," Jack whispered. "They're evidence of this corruption." Emily nodded. "Enough to bring down several high-ranking officials and cost certain companies millions in fraudulent contracts. But more than that, they're the twins' only protection. As long as I have them, as long as there's a threat of exposure, no one will risk harming Lucas and Sophia." The motorcyclist suddenly stopped, his helmet turning in their direction. For a heart-stopping moment, Jack was certain they'd been spotted. But then, the man's radio crackled to life, and he walked back toward his bike. "Negative on the grain elevator," they heard him report, moving to check the old farmhouse. As the three motorcycles roared away from their location, Jack felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. But Emily remained rigid, her maternal instincts keeping her on high alert. "They'll be back," she said with certainty. "They know we're in this area. It's only a matter of time." Jack started the truck's engine, keeping the headlights off as he carefully maneuvered away from the grain elevator. "Then we need to keep moving. How far is Denver?" "About 600 miles, Emily replied. "But Jack, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking," he interrupted. "I'm offering. Those children deserve better than to grow up as pawns in someone else's game." As they pulled back onto the service road, now heading north instead of east, Jack found himself thinking about his own past. He'd spent 15 years running from responsibilities, from connections, from anything that might anchor him to one place or one set of problems. But looking at Emily and the twins, he realized that some things were worth stopping for. "There's something else," Emily said as they rejoined a main highway. Marcus wasn't the only one who found evidence. There were others, contractors, inspectors even some government employees who started asking questions. Most of them just got transferred or lost their jobs. But a few. She didn't need to finish. Jack understood that they were dealing with people who had already demonstrated they were willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their secrets. "The journalist in Denver," Jack said. "Are you sure he can be trusted?" Emily pulled out a photograph from her backpack, a picture of Marcus and Isabella with a man in his 50s, all three of them smiling at what appeared to be a backyard barbecue. "David Chen. He and Marcus served together in the army. If anyone will risk everything to tell this story, it's him." As they drove through the gathering dusk, Jack realized that he was no longer just helping a woman and two children escape a dangerous situation. He was now part of a much larger story, one that could expose corruption at the highest levels, but only if they could survive long enough to tell it. The road ahead stretched into darkness, and somewhere behind them, three motorcycles were surely regrouping and planning their next move. But for the first time in years, Jack Sullivan felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Chapter 4. The Weight of Truth. The truck stop outside Amarillo appeared like an oasis of fluorescent light against the star-filled Texas sky. Jack pulled the 18-wheeler into a parking spot far from the main building, choosing a section where the overhead lights had burned out and shadows provided natural camouflage. "We need supplies," he told Emily as he shut off the engine. "And I need to make a phone call." Emily looked nervous about stopping anywhere public, but the babies needed fresh diapers and formula. They'd been traveling for nearly 12 hours, and the toll was showing on all of them. "I'll go in," Jack offered. "You stay here with Lucas and Sophia. Lock the doors." As Jack walked across the parking lot, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The truck stop was busy enough. Several other long-haul drivers were taking their mandatory rest breaks, and a steady stream of late-night travelers stopped for gas and snacks. But something felt off. Inside, Jack quickly gathered baby supplies and food, paying cash to avoid leaving any electronic trail. At the payphone in the corner, one of the few remaining relics in an age of cell phones, he dialed a number he hadn't called in 5 years. "Tommy? It's Jack Sullivan." "Jack, Jesus, where have you been? Nobody's heard from you since—" "Listen, I need a favor," Jack interrupted, "and I can't explain much over the phone. Do you still have contacts in Denver, people who can be trusted?" Tommy Rodriguez had been Jack's dispatcher back when he'd worked for a major shipping company, before he'd gone independent. More importantly, Tommy had connections throughout the trucking network, an informal communication system that operated parallel to official channels. "Depends what kind of trust you're talking about," Tommy replied cautiously. "You in some kind of trouble?" The kind where innocent people could get hurt if I'm not careful. I need to know if there's anyone in Denver who might be watching for someone trying to contact a journalist named David Chen. There was a long pause on the other end. And that's a very specific question, Jack. And it's the kind that makes me think you're involved in something bigger than a delivery dispute. Jack glanced around the truck stop, noting how many of the customers seemed to be paying attention to things other than their immediate business. Just tell me what you can find out, okay? And Tommy, if anyone comes asking about this conversation, you never heard from me. When Jack returned to the truck, he found Emily had managed to get both babies fed and changed in the cramped cab. She looked exhausted but determined, her maternal instincts having adapted quickly to their challenging circumstances. "Any problems?" she asked as he climbed back into the driver's seat. "Not yet, but I called a friend who might be able to help us when we get to Denver." Jack started the engine, but didn't immediately put the truck in gear. "Emily, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." She tensed, sensing the seriousness in his tone. "Those documents you're carrying, how do you know they're genuine? How do you know this isn't all some elaborate setup?" Emily was quiet for a moment, gently stroking Lucas's hair as he dozed in her arms. "Because I was there when Marcus found them," she said finally. "It was a Saturday morning, and I'd brought the twins to the federal building site where his crew was working. They were behind schedule on the renovation, so Marcus was putting in weekend hours." She shifted Sophia to a more comfortable position before continuing. "The twins were napping in their stroller, and I was helping Marcus organize some paperwork in the trailer they used as a field office. That's when we found the hidden compartment behind a false wall in what used to be a supply closet. Someone had converted it into a document storage area, probably decades ago. When Marcus's crew removed the old paneling, the compartment was revealed. It was full of files dating back 20 years. Jack felt a chill as he imagined the scope of what they were dealing with. 20 years of corruption. "More than corruption," Emily replied, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Entire construction projects that existed only on paper, millions of dollars paid to companies that did no actual work, environmental reports that were fabricated to allow construction in protected areas. It wasn't just fraud, it was systematic theft from taxpayers." As they pulled back onto the highway, now heading northwest toward Colorado, Jack found himself processing the full weight of what Emily had told him. They weren't just carrying evidence of a few isolated incidents. They had documentation of a conspiracy that had been operating for decades. "Marcus photographed everything before he reported it," Emily continued. "He was smart enough to know that the original documents might disappear once he made his report, but he never expected." She trailed off, but Jack understood. Marcus had expected the system to work. Expected that reporting corruption would lead to justice rather than tragedy. "The people chasing us," Jack said, "they're not just trying to recover stolen documents. They're trying to protect a multi-million-dollar operation." "Multi-million?" Emily shook her head. "Try multi-billion. And it's not just money, it's careers, reputations, political futures. Some of the names in those files." She paused, seeming to weigh how much to reveal. "And let's just say they include people who could lose a lot more than money if this comes out." They drove in silence for a while, the weight of their situation settling over them like a heavy blanket. Jack found himself thinking about his own motivations. What had started as a simple act of kindness had evolved into something that could impact national politics. Around midnight, as they approached the Colorado border, Emily made a confession that changed everything. "Jack, there's something I haven't told you about David Chen." The tone of her voice made Jack's hands tighten on the steering wheel. "He's not just Marcus's friend from the army," she continued. "He's my brother." Jack felt the pieces of the puzzle shifting in his mind. "Your brother, David Chen, is my married name," Emily explained. "My maiden name was Rodriguez, but I kept using it professionally because it helped me get work in certain communities. David is my older brother. And yes, he's a journalist, but he's also the person who first encouraged Marcus to report what he'd found." The implications hit Jack like a physical blow. So David already knows about the documents. He knows they exist, but he's never seen them. Marcus was supposed to meet with him the night of the accident. That meeting never happened. Jack realized they were walking into a situation far more complex than he'd imagined. David Chen wasn't just a journalist who might help them. He was a man whose sister and her charges were carrying evidence that could vindicate his friend's memory and expose the truth behind his apparent accident. "Emily," Jack said carefully, "are you sure your brother can protect you and the twins? Because once we make contact with him, there's no going back. Everyone involved will know exactly where we are and what we're planning." Emily looked down at the sleeping babies in her arms, then out at the dark landscape rushing past. "These children have already lost their parents to this conspiracy. I won't let them lose their future, too." As they crossed into Colorado, Jack realized that their journey was about to enter its most dangerous phase. Behind them, their pursuers were undoubtedly closing in. Ahead of them lay a reunion that could either save them all or put them directly in the crosshairs of people with unlimited resources and few scruples. The road to Denver stretched ahead like a thread of hope in the darkness. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were driving toward a confrontation that would determine not just their own fates, but the fate of a story that had already cost too many people too much. Chapter 5. The Denver Gambit. The Denver skyline emerged from the pre-dawn darkness like a promise of sanctuary, but Jack felt no relief as they approached the city limits. If anything, his anxiety had intensified during the night drive through Colorado's mountain passes. The closer they got to their destination, the more exposed they became. Emily had given him an address in a residential neighborhood near the University of Denver, where her brother David rented a small house that doubled as his home office. As a freelance investigative journalist, David had chosen a location that was both inconspicuous and accessible, qualities that now seemed critically important. "Pull over here," Emily said when they were still 3 blocks from David's house. "I need to call him first. Let him know we're coming." Jack found a 24-hour diner with a parking lot large enough for the truck. At this hour, they were the only customers, except for a few night shift workers grabbing coffee before heading home. Emily borrowed Jack's phone and stepped outside to make the call while he watched the twins. Through the windshield, Jack could see Emily pacing as she talked, her free hand gesturing emphatically. The conversation seemed intense, lasting nearly 10 minutes before she finally hung up and returned to the truck. "He's expecting us," she said, but her expression was troubled. "Oh, Jack, David told me something disturbing. Yesterday, 2 men came to his office asking about Marcus Castellanos. They claimed to be federal investigators looking into his company's contracts." Jack felt his stomach drop. "Did they mention you or the twins?" "Not specifically, but they asked detailed questions about Marcus's family and associates. David said they seemed particularly interested in whether Marcus had a nanny or caregiver for his children." The implications were clear. Their pursuers had already made the connection to David Chen and were likely watching him. What should have been their safe harbor might actually be a trap. "What do we do?" Jack asked. Emily was quiet for a moment, studying the sleeping babies. "David has a plan. There's a back entrance to his property through an alley that connects to a neighbor's yard. If we can get there undetected, he thinks we can avoid any surveillance." 20 minutes later, Jack found himself in the most surreal situation of his trucking career. He'd parked the 18-wheeler in the loading dock of a closed furniture warehouse 6 blocks from David's house. Emily had carefully transferred the twins to a double stroller she'd assembled from supplies in her backpack. Apparently, she'd been planning for this contingency all along. "You don't have to come with us," Emily told him. as they prepared to make the final approach to her brother's house. "Mum, you've already done more than anyone could ask." Jack looked at her, this woman who had somehow managed to maintain her strength and determination through an ordeal that would have broken most people. Then he looked at Lucas and Sophia, still sleeping peacefully despite everything they'd been through. "I've come this far," he said simply. "I'm not turning back now." The pre-dawn streets of Denver were quiet, with only the occasional early commuter or jogger to witness their careful progress through the residential neighborhood. Emily pushed the stroller while Jack carried her backpack, both of them alert to any sign of surveillance or pursuit. David Chen's house was a modest two-story structure with a small front yard and an even smaller backyard that backed up to an alley. As they approached through the neighbor's property, Jack could see lights on in what appeared to be a basement office. Emily tapped on a basement window in a specific pattern: 3 short, 2 long, 1 short. Within seconds, the window opened and a man's face appeared. Even in the dim light, Jack could see the family resemblance between Emily and her brother. "Thank God you're safe," David whispered as he helped them climb through the window into his basement office. David Chen was a compact man in his early 40s, with the intense eyes of someone who'd spent years investigating stories that others preferred to keep buried. His basement office was a journalist's cave, walls covered with documents, photographs, and charts connecting various pieces of information. Multiple computer monitors displayed news feeds and database searches. "Emily, what Marcus found, it's even bigger than we thought," David said as he helped settle the twins in a makeshift nursery area he'd prepared. I've been working on this story for months, ever since Marcus first contacted me. The documents you're carrying aren't just evidence of fraud, they're the missing piece that connects everything." He led them to a large table covered with photographs and papers. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a chart that showed financial connections between various construction companies and government officials. Marcus's documents prove that the same people have been orchestrating fraudulent contracts across multiple states for 2 decades. Emily pulled the sealed plastic bags from her backpack and carefully laid them out on the table. David's eyes widened as he saw the scope of what she'd brought. "This is it," he breathed. "This is everything we need to break the story wide open." But as David began examining the documents more closely, his expression grew troubled. "Emily, some of these names, these aren't just local officials or small-time contractors. This goes all the way to Washington." Jack found himself looking at photographs of men in expensive suits, shaking hands at groundbreaking ceremonies, their smiles masking what was apparently a massive criminal enterprise. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. "That's why they killed Marcus and Isabella," Emily said quietly, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. "And that's why they'll never stop hunting us. We know too much." David was already at his computer, beginning to upload photos of the documents to secure servers. "Not if I publish first," he said with determination. "Once this story breaks, trying to silence us would only confirm everything." But their moment of hope was short-lived. David's security monitor, which showed the view from cameras he'd installed around his property, suddenly lit up with movement. 3 vehicles had positioned themselves at strategic points around the block, not close enough to be obvious, but close enough to control all the exits. "They found us," David said, his voice grim. Emily gathered the twins closer, her maternal instincts overriding her fear. "How long do we have?" "They won't move until daylight," David replied, studying the surveillance pattern. "Too many witnesses during normal business hours. But they'll make sure we can't leave." Jack felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. These people, Emily, the twins, even David, had become his responsibility the moment he decided to stop for a hitchhiker on a lonely Texas highway. "There's another way," he said slowly, an idea forming in his mind. "David, do you have a way to broadcast live, stream video directly to the internet?" David nodded. Multiple platforms. Why? Jack was already moving toward his phone. Because I think it's time to change the rules of this game. Instead of hiding from these people, let's put them in the spotlight. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the basement windows, Jack realized that their ordeal was about to enter its most critical phase. The next few hours would determine whether Emily and the twins found safety, or whether the truth Marcus Castellanos had died trying to expose would be buried with them. But for the first time since this journey began, Jack felt like they had a fighting chance. Sometimes, the best defense was a good offense, and they were about to go on the attack. Chapter 6. Breaking Point. We go live in 10 minutes, David announced, his fingers flying across multiple keyboards as he prepared his streaming equipment. 3 cameras were positioned around the basement office, and backup power supplies hummed quietly in the corner. Once we start broadcasting, there's no going back. Jack stood near the window, watching the vehicles that had positioned themselves around the block. The men inside weren't making any attempt to hide their presence now. Clearly, they'd decided that subtlety was no longer necessary. Emily sat in a corner with Lucas and Sophia, who had finally awakened and were quietly playing with the toys David had hastily assembled. Despite everything they'd been through, the twins seemed remarkably resilient, their innocent laughter providing a stark contrast to the tension filling the room. "Jack," Emily called softly. He turned to find her holding out an envelope. "If something happens to me, I need you to make sure this gets to the right people." Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter addressed to the twins, along with photographs of Marcus and Isabella Castellanos. Jack realized Emily had been carrying not just evidence of corruption, but memories, proof that these children had once had loving parents who died trying to do the right thing. "Nothing's going to happen to you," Jack said firmly, but Emily's smile was sad and knowing. "But you can't promise that," she replied. "But you can promise that their story will be told." David's voice cut through their moment. "We're live in 60 seconds. Emily, I need you at the main camera. Jack, can you handle the document display?" As they took their positions, Jack felt a strange calm settle over him. After years of running from commitments and responsibilities, he was finally standing still for something that mattered. "Good morning," David began, looking directly into the camera. "My name is David Chen, and I'm broadcasting live from Denver, Colorado. What you're about to see and hear will expose a conspiracy that has stolen billions of dollars from American taxpayers and cost innocent people their lives." Emily stepped into frame, the twins in her arms. "These are Lucas and Sophia Castellanos. 3 weeks ago, they were orphaned when their parents died in what authorities called a car accident. But Marcus and Isabella Castellanos weren't victims of bad weather or driver error. They were eliminated because they discovered evidence of massive government fraud." Jack began displaying the documents on camera, each page revealing another layer of the conspiracy. Financial records showing payments to non-existent companies. Environmental reports that had been falsified to allow construction in protected areas. Correspondence between officials discussing how to handle contractors who asked too many questions. "For 20 years, David continued, a network of corrupt officials and contractors has been systematically stealing from federal construction budgets. They've built careers and fortunes on projects that existed only on paper, while real infrastructure crumbled and communities went without essential services." The live stream was gaining viewers rapidly. Hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands of people watching in real time as the evidence unfolded. Comments flooded in from across the country, many from construction workers and government employees who said they'd witnessed similar suspicious activities. But as their audience grew, so did the pressure from outside. Jack could see more vehicles arriving, and men in dark suits taking positions around the neighboring houses. They were running out of time. Uday, the people responsible for this conspiracy are watching us right now, Emily said, looking directly into the camera. They're surrounding this building, and they believe they can silence the truth through intimidation. But they've made one critical mistake. She paused, and Jack saw something in her expression that he'd never seen before. Not fear, but fierce determination. They think this is about documents and evidence, Emily continued. But it's not. It's about two children who deserve to grow up in a world where doing the right thing doesn't get you killed. It's about a man named Marcus Castellanos who believed that corruption should be exposed, not covered up. And it's about everyone watching this broadcast who has the power to demand accountability. David picked up the narrative seamlessly. In the next hour, we'll be releasing all of these documents to major news outlets, law enforcement agencies, and government oversight committees. But more importantly, we're putting them online where every citizen can see exactly how their tax dollars have been stolen. That's when Jack heard it. The sound of vehicles moving closer, engines revving as their watchers prepared to act. Through the window, he could see men approaching the house from multiple directions. "They're coming," he announced quietly. David nodded grimly. "I expected this. Everyone watching. What you're about to see is exactly the kind of intimidation that has kept this conspiracy hidden for 2 decades." The sound of heavy footsteps on the front porch was clearly audible through the live stream. A moment later, aggressive knocking, more like pounding, echoed through the house. "This is federal law enforcement," a voice shouted. "Open the door immediately." David kept broadcasting. "Federal law enforcement doesn't surround houses at dawn without warrants. Federal law enforcement doesn't chase women and children across state lines to recover evidence of corruption." Emily looked into the camera one final time. "If something happens to us, remember that we had these documents because Marcus Castellanos risked everything to expose the truth. Don't let his sacrifice be in vain." The pounding grew more insistent, and Jack could hear the sound of windows being tested. Their time was almost up. But then something unexpected happened. David's phone began ringing, not just once, but continuously, call after call from news organizations, government officials, and advocacy groups who had been watching the live stream. David Chen. The voice on speaker belonged to Senator Patricia Hawthorne, chair of the Senate Oversight Committee. "I've been watching your broadcast. How quickly can you get those documents to my office?" Other calls followed rapidly. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit, the Inspector General's office, major newspapers and television networks. The live stream had accomplished exactly what Jack had hoped. It had created too much public attention for their pursuers to simply make them disappear. The pounding on the door stopped. Through the window, Jack could see the men in dark suits receiving urgent phone calls of their own. After several tense minutes, the vehicles began pulling away one by one. Emily collapsed into a chair, finally allowing herself to cry as the adrenaline wore off. The twins, seemingly oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded, continued playing with their toys. "Is it over?" she asked. David was still monitoring the stream, watching as viewer numbers continued to climb and media outlets began picking up the story. "The dangerous part might be over," he said carefully. But the real work is just beginning." Jack realized that their journey had reached its destination not with a dramatic confrontation, but with something more powerful, the truth, broadcast to millions of people who could no longer ignore it. As the sun rose fully over Denver, bringing with it the promise of a new day, Jack looked at Emily and the twins and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not just for their immediate safety, but for the possibility that sometimes, against all odds, justice actually could prevail. Chapter 7. New Beginnings. 6 months later, the small farmhouse outside Boulder, Colorado, was nothing like the luxury home where Lucas and Sophia had spent their first year of life. but it was filled with something their previous residence had lost in its final months: peace. Emily sat on the front porch, watching the twins take their first tentative steps across the wooden deck. Their delighted squeals mixing with the sound of wind through the aspen trees. Jack's truck was parked in the gravel driveway, looking somehow smaller and less imposing than it had during their desperate flight across Texas and Colorado. He'd kept his promise to himself and taken a break from long-haul trucking, using his savings to rent the farmhouse and give Emily and the children a safe place to rebuild their lives. The fallout from their live broadcast had been swift and far-reaching. Within weeks, federal investigators had arrested 17 people on charges ranging from fraud to conspiracy. The construction companies involved had their contracts terminated, and several high-ranking officials had resigned rather than face congressional hearings. Marcus Castellanos had been posthumously vindicated, his name cleared and his courage recognized. But for Emily, the most important victory was simpler and more personal. Lucas and Sophia were safe, healthy, and beginning to call her Mama in their growing vocabulary. The adoption papers came through, she told Jack as he joined her on the porch, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a juice box for Sophia, who immediately toddled over to claim it. Jack smiled, watching as Lucas attempted to climb the porch steps with the determination of someone who refused to accept limitations. "How does it feel to be officially their mother?" "Like something I should have done months ago," Emily replied. "Marcus and Isabella would have wanted it this way. They trusted me with their children's lives. Now it's legal as well as moral." David Chen's investigative series had won a Pulitzer Prize, but more importantly, it had led to comprehensive reforms in government contracting procedures. He visited regularly, reveling in his role as Uncle David and bringing increasingly sophisticated toys that challenged the twins' growing curiosity about the world. "I got a call from Senator Hawthorne's office yesterday," Emily mentioned, as they watched the children explore their small but secure world. "They want me to testify before Congress about whistleblower protection laws." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And are you ready for that kind of public attention?" "I think so," Emily said thoughtfully. "Marcus and Isabella died because they tried to do the right thing quietly, through proper channels. Maybe it's time to do the right thing loudly, in front of cameras and congressional committees." The sound of a car coming up the gravel drive interrupted their conversation. Emily tensed automatically, old habits from their months of looking over their shoulders, but relaxed when she recognized David's familiar Honda Civic. David emerged from the car carrying a large wrapped package and wearing the excited expression he always got when he had news to share. "I come bearing gifts and updates," he announced, scooping up Sophia, who giggled and grabbed his glasses. "Updates first," Emily said, settling Lucas on her lap. 3 more arrests yesterday," David reported with satisfaction, "including the guy who was coordinating the surveillance teams that chased us. Apparently, our live broadcast provided enough evidence for federal prosecutors to build a racketeering case." The package turned out to be a custom-made photo album documenting the twins' journey from tragedy to safety. David had worked with Emily to create a record that would help Lucas and Sophia understand their story when they were old enough. Their parents, courage, their escape across the desert, and the network of people who had helped ensure their survival. "There's something else," David said as they flipped through the album. "I've been approached by a documentary filmmaker. She wants to tell the whole story. Marcus and Isabella's investigation, your escape with the children, the live broadcast, everything, but only if you're comfortable with it." Emily looked down at the twins, who were now thoroughly engaged in attempting to destroy the wrapping paper from David's gift. What would be the purpose? Education? Prevention? Making sure people understand how corruption works and how ordinary citizens can fight back. David paused, and honoring Marcus and Isabella's memory. Jack found himself thinking about his own role in the story. For 15 years, He'd lived a life of deliberate isolation, avoiding connections and responsibilities. But that sunny afternoon on the porch, surrounded by the laughter of children and the quiet satisfaction of having done something truly meaningful, he couldn't imagine going back to that solitary existence. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about making some changes in my life." Emily looked at him with curiosity and perhaps a hint of hope. "Now, my trucking days are pretty much over," Jack continued. "Too much attention, too many people who remember the story. But I've been offered a job with a company that provides security consulting for whistleblowers and their families." "Jack, that's wonderful," Emily said, and he could hear genuine happiness in her voice. "It means I'd be based here in Colorado," he added. If that would be okay." Emily's answer came not in words, but in the way her face lit up, and in Sophia's delighted squeal as she abandoned her uncle's glasses to toddle over to Jack, arms outstretched. As the afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows across the farmhouse yard, Jack realized that their story had become something none of them had expected when it began on that desert highway. It had started with fear and desperation, evolved through courage and determination, and arrived at something that looked remarkably like hope. Lucas took his first independent steps that day, walking from Emily's arms to Jack's without falling, his face radiating pure joy at his accomplishment. Sophia applauded enthusiastically, though she remained committed to crawling as her primary mode of transportation. "They won't remember any of the bad parts," Emily observed, watching her children play. "When they're older, all they'll know is that they're loved and safe." "That's not quite true," David corrected gently. "They'll know the story of their parents, courage. They'll understand that doing the right thing sometimes requires sacrifice. And they'll know that there are people in the world who will risk everything to protect children they barely know." As if to prove his point, Jack found himself making a promise that would have terrified him a year earlier. Whatever challenges they face growing up, they won't face them alone. The documentary was eventually made, becoming a powerful testimony to the importance of investigative journalism and whistleblower protection. Emily's congressional testimony led to significant reforms in how corruption cases are handled. And the Marcus and Isabella Castellanos Foundation, established with funds recovered from the fraudulent contracts, now provides legal and financial support to other families who find themselves targeted for exposing wrongdoing. But perhaps the most important outcome was simpler. Two children who had lost everything found a new family built not on biology, but on choice, courage, and love. As the stars began to appear over the Colorado mountains, Jack helped Emily put the twins to bed in their shared bedroom, with its hand-painted murals of trucks and highways, a gentle reminder of the journey that had brought them all together. "Sweet dreams, little travelers," Emily whispered, kissing each child goodnight. And if you've been moved by the story of Emily, Jack, Lucas, and Sophia, this tale of courage overcoming corruption, of strangers becoming family, and of truth prevailing against impossible odds, then you understand that some journeys begin with a single act of kindness on a lonely highway. Their story reminds us that heroism isn't found in grand gestures, but in the simple decision to stop for someone who needs help. We hope this story has inspired you to consider your own capacity for courage, your own ability to make a difference in someone else's life. Like the thousands of people who watched that live broadcast and demanded accountability, you too have the power to insist that truth matters and that justice prevails. If this story resonated with you, we invite you to subscribe to our channel, where we share more stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Leave us a comment telling us what act of kindness you've witnessed or experienced that changed everything. Hit the like button to help others discover these tales of hope and human connection. And most importantly, remember that somewhere out there, someone might be standing on the side of a highway, waiting for a stranger to show them that the world still contains people willing to stop and help. The road continues, and every mile offers a new opportunity to choose compassion over convenience, courage over comfort. What will your next mile bring? Fimda Historia.